I have kind of a weird relationship with Splatoon. You see, I played the original back on Wii U and absolutely loved it. At the time, it was unlike anything I'd ever played before. The movement felt awesome, turf wars were exciting, events felt important, SpongeBob was canon. Truly, it was some of the best the system had to offer. Over the years, my interest in the series would kind of wane. I'd still keep up with it from the sidelines, but throughout most of Splatoon 2's lifespan, I didn't really actively engage with the series. When Splatoon 3 launched, I saw it as my chance to finally hop back into the franchise and really stick with it this time as my go-to online multiplayer game. And I did, for about 2 months. Look, I don't blame the game itself for getting stale quickly or anything, but having grown up with Nintendo systems like the GBA and the DS, I'm just going to gravitate more towards single-player experiences, which is exactly why there's one part of Splatoon I never fell out of love with. Hero mode. On the surface, Splatoon's hero mode is exactly what you'd expect out of a quote-unquote typical Nintendo game. Platform your way from stage to stage, defeating enemies, finding temporary power-ups and optional collectibles if you want to be meticulous, which I did, then face off against the boss of the world so you can move on to the next until credits. However, thanks to Splatoon's fresh vibes, satisfying combat, unique movement system, and hidden lore that recontextualizes so much of the world, Hero Mode was an experience I'd revisit over and over again. Embarrassingly, more than the actual main modes of the game. Then in 2018, Splatoon 2's Octo expansion dramatically raised the bar of what a single-player story mode can be like in Splatoon. The gameplay more varied and demanding, the supporting cast more prominent, and the story itself much darker, truly delving into the dark underbelly of its world that was only really hinted at in previous campaigns. And while in Splatoon 1 or 2's campaigns you were just playing as your avatar, here you were playing as an actual character, Agent 8. While not as dark, Splatoon 3 thankfully followed Octo Expansion's footsteps and combined its strengths with those of the previous hero modes to deliver another excellent single-player experience. The question then became, just what are they going to do for Splatoon 3's DLC? I mean, are they just going to do Octo Expansion again? Well, yes and no. Not much was known about Splatoon 3's side order when it was revealed about a year ago. It looked like we were once again playing as Agent 8 though, who has to now ascend the Spire of Order for one reason or another. Off the hooks Marina and Pearl, which were also prevalent during Octo Expansion, are coming back as well, which is great. Everything looked so mysterious and a little creepy, going for an aesthetic drastically different from the rest of the series, and I was definitely eager to see just what they were cooking. Over time, more details were revealed. Pearl is a drone now? Are those all new enemies? Is that Deadfish? It really is. In case you don't know, Deadfish, or Oct, as their actual name seems to be, is one of the most popular characters introduced in Octo Expansion, though we never actually got to encounter them. We just know of their backstory and that they composed the music heard in the Deep Sea Metro, in-universe of course. The wait for Side Order took longer than most people initially expected, and just before launch, an overview trailer came out. We finally got a good understanding of how this expansion is actually going to play, going for more so its own thing rather than just trying to improve on the Splatoon hero mode formula again, which on paper, I'm totally cool with. But my greatest fear about Side Order was then confirmed to be true. It was going to be a roguelike. A roguelite, right? Which means that every floor in the Spire of Order will be randomized, and if you fail to climb to the top, you have to start all over again from floor 1, with any kind of character upgrades gained along the way reset to 0. Now, I've dabbled into roguelites before, like 20XX, Shovel Knight Dig, Binding of Isaac, and my experiences with them have been mixed. I played through a couple times because I was bored, played to the end once and had absolutely no desire to revisit it, and couldn't ever get into for more than an hour. I know, it's definitely a me thing. I think roguelites just might not really appeal to my tastes in games. I love it when games have clear progression, getting to see my characters start out weak and grow stronger as my skills develop over time too. It's awesome. So having to start over just because I may have gotten a little careless or didn't really know what I was up against really takes the wind out of my sails. But if I'm honest, there was a bigger reason I was worried about Side Order's structure. See, this was basically marketed as kind of a follow-up to Octo Expansion, so the story and additions to the series lore were some of what I was looking forward to the most. Problem being, roguelites don't usually lend themselves to story-heavy campaigns, seeing as they're more so designed with the expectation that you're not going to make it through all the way on your first run, and that even after you do, you will still be left with a replayable experience that won't get old too quick. Having said all that, I was still pretty cautiously optimistic about Side Order until its release. Well, it's been out for a while, so let's actually get into it. Is it a worthy divergence from the series' single-player formula? And did it live up to my hopes as a follow-up to Octo Expansion? Well, only one way to find out. We once again play as Agent 8, who wakes up in a strange place resembling Inkopolis Square, and teams up with Pearl, who is, naturally, now a drone. After the obligatory character designing and intro exposition, we're off to the Spire of Order. Inside, we finally meet Oct, who introduces us to color chips. They're essentially character upgrades equipped to your palette until your run ends, one way or another. The first climb is this game's tutorial segment, which serves to get you comfortable with the goal requirements you'll have to meet in order to move on to the next floor, all the while collecting color chips and membucks, which are currency within the Spire. The elevator only moves up one floor at a time, so you'll have to clear each floor's objective to proceed to the next. Whether it be destroying portals which summon enemy hordes, painting and protecting splot zones until the timer hits 0, defeat certain enemies that will flee on sight, ink a turbine tower until it reaches its goal point, or... Uh-oh. Yeah, Pearl's reaction is appropriate because they brought back the most infamous mission type from Octo Expansion, guiding the 8-ball, or in this case the figure 8-ball, to its goal. Don't panic yet though, it's actually a significant improvement from how these were handled in the past. Each floor in the Spire, barring a few exceptions, is more of an arena than a course, so the goal is usually close by. Better yet, these figure 8 balls cannot fall off stage, and enemies you roll the ball into will be splatted almost instantly. I'm genuinely impressed by how they managed to make this mission type one of my favorites, only behind the enemy portals one. On the 10th floor, you fight a boss, and the tutorial is over. You get sent back outside, and now you can try your luck at climbing to the Spire of Order's 30th floor. However, enemies will now hit harder, take more damage to splat, and you only have one life. Thankfully, all of that can be changed with pearls, spelled like pearls, not to be confused with Pearl Splatoon, please keep up. At the end of every run, win or lose, the color chips you've accumulated will be turned into pearls. With pearls, you can purchase permanent upgrades to assist you, such as more lives, attack and defense boosts, unlocking more kinds of color chips, and much more. Though your selection will be limited at first. I could be wrong on this, but I think this is what makes Side Order a roguelite and not a roguelike. There's permanent progression in between runs that will make subsequent runs easier, whereas, from my understanding, roguelikes always send you back to square one after every run, meaning your character's starting point for every one would be exactly identical. The major changing factors being the world layout and the player's skill level. With Pearls as a progression system, Side Order encourages you to try your best on every run, since the farther you'll get, the more color chips you'll accumulate, which are then converted into pearls that can be used to make future runs easier. From a gameplay standpoint, this progression system is excellent at making sure I felt my time on each run was well spent. Another progression system is in place as well, this time relating to palettes, which are basically kits based on different characters from the series. Before climbing the Spire, you may choose which palette to use, which will determine your main weapon as well as your starting sub-weapon and special. They can be changed later. Whenever you complete a new boss floor with each palette, you get a locker key. These lockers can contain anything from pearls, some optional lore which I am totally here for, and of course, additional palettes, Which means, if you want to unlock every last locker, you're gonna have to get to the top of the spire with every single pallet. Now, this may sound like a tall order at first, a pun not intended, I swear, but it starts to look more and more feasible once you realize just how addictive side order really is. And this seems like a good time to talk about what a typical run in side order usually looks like. You start a new run by entering the elevator in the spire's foyer. It's in this elevator that you decide which room layout you want to tackle on the next floor, with layouts changing in difficulty from easy, normal, hard, and then rigorous, with each difficulty netting you more membucks upon completion. The Spire of Order's floors are basically bite-sized challenges when compared to the usual stages you'd find in other Splatoon story modes. You can still shoot ink to splat enemies, or to cover ground, and then swim in the ink, as expected. But there are some new additions to the basic gameplay, being color chips and the addition of Pearl in her new drone form. Thanks to the Pearl drone, you can glide any time by holding the jump button. This is especially useful at the beginning of each floor when choosing where to fall down from the cage. Pearl will also follow you around while targeting enemies, but can't really do much to them until she's upgraded with corresponding color chips, which let her use a variety of sub-weapons and specials on nearby foes. Color chips can upgrade much more than just the Pearl drone though. By setting color chips to your palette, Agent 8's abilities can be augmented in many ways, such as faster movement, better range, stronger ink damage, or higher likeliness for item drops, which pairs nicely with the new lucky chain system that incentivizes splatting hordes of enemies in a row for more drops as well. Speaking of color chips, my personal favorite is easily Squid Attack, which transforms the Squid Surge and, more importantly, Squid Roll into an offensive maneuver that can save you from a bind. It just feels really fun to use. You're guaranteed at least one color chip at the start of each floor, but another way to obtain them is buying them with membucks on vending machine floors. These floors, as you might have guessed, contain no danger, just a vending machine through which you can buy additional color chips, alternate sub-weapons or specials in case you prefer what's available to your palette's defaults, and even pearls, though not a lot. There's more kinds of floors like danger and bonus floors, which I won't go in depth about now, but I promise the game does a good job of explaining it. Now, what I want to talk about are boss floors. Every 10th floor you will find yourself facing a boss, with the first two being randomly chosen out of a pool of 3, and the last one always being the same. The bosses themselves are solid enough, not the best the Splatoon series has to offer by any means, but considering they had to design them with every possible variation of weapons and color chips in mind, I think them being as good as they are is impressive enough. Alright, I think that just about covers the important elements of Side Order's gameplay. Sorry to have just kinda dropped all that on you. If you haven't played it yet, I'm sure this sounds like a lot, but I can assure you that it makes more sense when you're actually playing it. In case it wasn't obvious from how I was talking about the mechanics and all that, the gameplay is where I believe Side Order really shines. Like, I know I already mentioned it, but I can't stress enough how addictive I found Side Order to be, even though I'm not really a roguelite guy. And if you aren't either, but like Splatoon's core gameplay, then I think you're probably gonna have a good time with this expansion. And if you're not down with Splatoon's core gameplay, I'm surprised you're even watching this. Thanks though. Since floors are much more like arenas than linear stages to complete, there's much less focus on platforming here and a lot more on combat. Fighting through hordes of these new enemies while trying to complete the floor's objective is such a rush, kinda reminiscent of a small-scale, single-player version of Salmon Run. Because floors take so little time to complete, blasting through them in quick succession feels exhilarating, especially on the later ones when things get spicier. And even losing a run doesn't feel discouraging, since you still get rewarded for your efforts with pearls. Even after having finished a run with every available palette, I still found myself coming back for more. Especially to do single color runs, which means you always go for color chips from the same category to get more pearls at the end. It also helps that you can turn off any permanent upgrades you've acquired when you feel like runs are getting too easy. In addition, you're also incentivized to rack up pearls for purchasable cosmetic gear for your avatar or locker decorations in base Splatoon 3. Well, so far so good, right? I mean, all in all, this seems like a brilliant new take on Splatoon's gameplay. Well, I have some gripes with it. Let's talk presentation. Overall, I'd say it's solid. The aesthetic of this nearly colorless world captured my imagination at first, and there's little touches that really add to its charm, like your ink color depending on the color chips you've acquired, or the main hub and foyer's music being accompanied with these nice little visual effects. Details like that just add to this game's sense of polish. Oh, and speaking of music, it's also pretty good. Though, if I'm honest, this is probably my least favorite Hero Mode soundtrack. Like, by a lot. I feel like it should have been a slam dunk. I mean, Deadfish and Off the Hook are some of my favorite in-universe artists. Yet I feel their style here was very different from how it was in Splatoon 2. That's how I felt at least. Until I realized, well after finishing the game, that the large majority of Side Order's music was not done by either artist, but rather a new in-universe band called Free Association. Their music isn't bad or anything, but I didn't really get attached to it the same way I did in previous Hero Mode campaigns. In fact, I kinda got tired of the soundtrack on later runs that I actually started playing on mute most of the time, which feels sacrilegious, but I never found myself doing that in Splatoon before. The visuals, though, are an aspect I got tired of even quicker, honestly. I am sad to say this because, on the surface, Side Order has such a different style from the rest of the series. But unfortunately, it doesn't really do much with it, at least not to the degree I'd hoped after seeing the reveal trailer. We got all these brief shots that looked so weird and intriguing, and the final product has almost none of that. There were some neat backgrounds, but they leaned into a more digital style than this almost alien feel we saw in the reveal. Worse yet, though, is that once you've finished your climb through the Spiral of Order once, you've basically seen everything there is to see. Which, for a game with random floors that's meant to be replayed over and over, I think is really unfortunate. I feared this would be the case considering that's what many roguelites are like, and sadly, I think another aspect of Side Order was hurt even more by this game's genre choice. This part of the video will have mild spoilers for the tutorial section of the game. This is where I think we get to the root of the problem. After having watched the reveal trailer, my expectations for the expansion story were set pretty high, thanks to a combination of the trailer's vague and interesting nature, and the fact that basically the most likable characters from Octo expansion are back, except Agent 3 and Craig. I guess they were busy being in the main story mode or whatever. And starting up Side Order for the first time, I'm not gonna lie, the first impressions were pretty strong. After a train ride to Inkopolis Square goes wrong for our avatar character, we cut to the Order's sector, a hub area resembling the square sucked of its color. Pearl, in her new drone form, finds Agent 8, who you once again play as, in the sector, but Marina is missing, so you head into the Spiral of Order together, hoping to find her at the top. After getting ambushed in the foyer, you enter the elevator and finally meet Act, who we knew as Deadfish, in the flesh for the first time. The rest of the opening section is mainly dedicated to explaining the different gameplay mechanics, until you reach the boss floor, where after a pretty cool boss fight, Marina is retrieved and the true climb can begin. Now all in all, that sounds pretty good for an introduction, and it really is. The problem I have with Side Order's story here is the fact that what I just described of it is more than half of the entire story. You could even say it's the entire plot aside from the ending if you don't count the optional lore. While actually climbing the spire, you will get a few lines of dialogue from Pearl, Marina and Oct in the elevator every once in a while, but they either just explain different mechanics or are sadly from a very small handful of conversations that might reference one thing or another from their pasts. And you'll have seen them all very quickly. This issue extends to the floors themselves too. In any other Splatoon hero mode, you'd have the supporting cast comment on your progress through the level or quip on the kind of situation you're in, which is pretty fun, but of course Side Order only has these arenas. They can have multiple different difficulties and objectives, so mid-floor dialogue is rare and usually pretty generic. Then you have Marina's devlogs, the optional lore I've mentioned here and there. It's a pretty fun read, actually. There's some really nice, cute details there, but it also kind of goes into detail explaining how the Spiral of Order was formed, and it's not really that interesting, unfortunately. I do feel bad saying this, but it really just feels like it's focused on tying up some of Octo Expansion's loose ends, which is nice in the moment until you realize not much really happens in Side Order. And because of all of that, true to its name, this DLC really does feel like a side story. Not because it focuses on something else in the main plot, but because it doesn't feel like anything that important happens in the world or to any of the characters. Even Oct, who we've waited so long to meet, ultimately ends up not really contributing much to the story or any fun character dynamics. They just kind of feel like a third or a fourth wheel, honestly. I hope I've made it clear why I'm so torn on Side Order. Its gameplay does feel fresh compared to previous story modes, and its replayable nature kept me coming back to it every now and then for a couple of weeks after launch. but I feel it failed to really stick with me like most Splatoon hero modes do. The story was almost non-existent, the optional lore was cute but kinda disappointing, and yes, I understand that saying I play Splatoon for the story is kind of an insane thing to say. The aesthetic was much more dull than the reveal trailer implied, and I really didn't feel the need to go back to its soundtrack apart from like 2 or 3 songs. All of this adds up to an expansion that really is pretty great when you're playing it, but one I feel fails to leave an impact otherwise. And you know, that's totally fine if you're looking for a fun, replayable take on Splatoon's gameplay. This will probably be perfect for you. That's just not exactly what I was looking for in a follow-up to Octo expansion. Not to say I was expecting Side Order to surpass it or anything, but it does make me wonder. Was featuring largely the same cast as Octo expansion mainly a marketing move? I mean, it's not like their stories really go anywhere significant, at least not enough that an entire DLC campaign should be dedicated to it. And hey, since this is a new kind of single-player campaign, you would expect more of the marketing to be around the gameplay itself, and not just the very brief story, which did seem to be the main focus for almost every trailer for it, until they dropped the overview trailer less than 2 weeks before release. Almost every trailer put the story, characters, and world at the forefront, which, when looking back, is actually super misleading. The trailers created very specific expectations around Side Order, which I feel it did not really live up to with what it had to offer outside of its gameplay. It wasn't really my intention to be so negative for this part of the video, I swear. It took me longer to write the script than it probably should have, and as time went on, the more I thought about Side Order, the more my feelings began to sour. Without delving into more spoilers, I think I said what I have to say. So there's only one thing really left to do. Drop the tier list, please. Alright, let's not beat around the bush. Up in S tier you got the big boys, you got Octo Expansion, Return of the Mammalians, classics. In A tier I put Splatoon 1's hero mode, it might be the nostalgia speaking, but I think it's one of the greats. And in B tier I put Splatoon 2's. Not a complete letdown, but it could have been a lot better. So where does Side Order fit in? At the time I had started working on this video, I would have probably said A tier just below Splatoon 1, but the more I thought about it, I think it's right beside Splatoon 2's overall. It has a lot to offer, and gameplay wise it's definitely much stronger, but I think it just falls short for me in most aspects I care about. But that's only my subjective rating, of course, and if you disagree that's totally cool. My opinion is only that, an opinion. I chose that rating because of how I felt about it, and not as like an objective measure of quality or something. I'm genuinely curious to see what others think of this expansion. I've seen some a bit miffed by it, and others very excited by what we did get from it. So I'd love to know what you thought of Side Order, if you've played it already. I promise this isn't just engagement bait, I really do want to know. Whoa, you made it all the way to the end? This video took a lot of effort and time since I'm very new at this, so I'm really glad you endured the whole thing. Appreciate it. I intend to make another video soon, so feel free to stick around. It won't be about Splatoon this time, but a different game that's coming out very soon. Until then, I'd love to know how you think I could improve, or why you think I'm stupid. I'm open to both. And I guess that's about it. I don't really have one of those ending catchphrases yet, so I guess I could just end the video here?